Coming up on Diplomatic Channel, Saudi Arabia admits missing journalist Jamal Khashoggi is dead. The British ambassador to Nigeria, Mr. Paul Arkwright, speaks on Nigeria's preparation for the 2019 elections. Plus, the UN General Assembly votes to allow Palestine act more like a full member in 2019. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale, standing in for your regular host, Amarachi Ubani. We begin this week with Turkey's threat to reveal all details about the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi after Saudi Arabia admitted for the first time that he had been killed in its consulate in Istanbul. Saudi Arabia suggested on Friday that Mr. Khashoggi, a prominent Saudi critic, had died in a fistfight. Turkish officials had said previously that he was deliberately killed inside the consulate and his body dismembered.
A state media statement from the Saudi public prosecutor says a fight broke out between Khashoggi and the people who met him in the country's consulate in Istanbul, which led to his death. Two senior officials, Royal Court Advisor Saud Al-Qahtani and Deputy Intelligence Chief Ahmed Asiri, have been fired from their positions over the incident. Also, 18 Saudi nationals have been arrested and investigations are ongoing. Khashoggi, a critic of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, went missing after entering the consulate on October 2nd to obtain documents for his upcoming marriage. Saturday's comments marks the first time since Khashoggi went missing that the Saudis admitted to his death. Turkish officials had said they believed he was killed in the consulate building, but Saudi Arabia had previously denied the allegations and said Khashoggi had left the building. Nevertheless, U.S. President Donald Trump says that Saudi Arabia's explanation is credible.
Yes. Well, I think it's a good first step. It's a big step. It's a lot of people involved, and I think it's a great first step. You probably know that very fair person, Reuters, and you probably know that you're very good, very, very good. We have a tremendous order. Probably the people around this table have the vast percentage of the $110 billion order from Saudi. We have $450 billion, but on defense we have $110 billion, and I would say almost 100% of it would be sitting right around this table with the great companies. Raytheon's here too, just great companies. Very important. I don't want to tell them. I don't want to look over and tell Marilyn or Dennis, by the way, we're going to take $25 billion worth of sales away from you, because that would mean a lot of jobs. It would mean a lot of everything. And Saudi Arabia has been a great ally, but what happened is unacceptable. We are going to see they've arrested, just for the people at the table, a large number of people having to do with the event that took place in Turkey in the consulate, the Saudi consulate. And it's a big first step. It's only a first step, but it's a big first step.
Meanwhile, his death has deepened questions about whether 33-year-old Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, is fit to rule. He's been the face of reform in the deeply conservative kingdom, with an ambitious economic project and permitting women to drive. But MBS has made enemies: a crackdown on dissent, a purge of top royals and businessmen on corruption charges. He's sidelined senior princes, taking the reins of security and intelligence agencies. The resort sources say it's a build-up of anger in the royal court that could prove dangerous for MBS and prompt demands that King Salman rein in his favorite son.
Earlier, Turkish sources told media outlets that Turkey has audio and visual evidence to prove Khashoggi was deliberately killed in the Saudi consulate. But this evidence is yet to be made public. So what's causing this delay, and why did it take Saudi Arabia over 2 weeks to admit to his death? These are some of the questions I asked my guest on the program, security expert Chidi Nwanu, and here's what he had to say. Thanks for joining us, Chidi Nwanu. So what do you make of Saudi Arabia's claim that Jamal Khashoggi died in a fight at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul?
Good. Thanks for having me. Well, to see the Saudi claims are fairly incredible, that they've denied for 2 weeks that Khashoggi was actually present consulate, and they denied for over 2 weeks that any harm came to him. So to come up with this excuse now is, as I said, it's fairly incredible. And I don't think the objective right now is to present a case that can be believed. It's more or less to present a case that they can use to mitigate the damage that has been done.
Saudi Arabia claims the officials involved in his death tried to cover up the murder. Clearly, this is meant to absolve Saudi authorities of being involved in his murder. How credible is this really?
So, as I was saying, the issue here now is not really about presenting a credible narrative, because there is no narrative that the Saudis can present that is credible. It's very clear to everybody that the Turks have not just a suspicion, but they obviously have information, recordings, video, audio, from whatever devices that they've managed to infiltrate of what actually took place, and they have more or less a clear chronology of whatever took place in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. So the issue now is not about presenting a credible narrative. They know that there is no narrative they'll present that is believable to anyone. What they're looking for now is presenting a narrative that can be used by themselves and their allies to kind of move the blame, present some scapegoats, which they've done. They've got 80 people out there. They've got a major general who they're putting the blame on, and a few princes they're throwing out there as their main culprit. So that's the main issue now, is to create a new narrative in that although this happened, it happened as a rogue operation, nothing to do with the main people, Prince Salman and his father, and that the Saudis are now dealing with it. So no, they don't expect anyone to believe it, but they just need to say something in order to move on to whatever they think is the next step.
So let's talk about Turkey. Turkey claims to have video and audio evidence that Khashoggi was murdered. Why don't they release this so-called evidence that they do have to the public?
Well, the two reasons why there's several reasons, but the two main ones are that this evidence, if it exists, is evidence for a criminal trial, if a criminal trial should ever come out. So releasing it to the public doesn't necessarily benefits any kind of legal procedure that will follow. The second reason is that this is essentially, if you want to look at this in a very cynical way, it's very good blackmail material. So as long as the Saudis have announced that they have the Turks have announced that they have this material, they have most likely shown it to the Americans, shown it to the Saudis. And so behind the scenes, these two key players know what is that is out there. And just by announcing it and threatening to release it, they have a great leverage over the Saudis. They can start extracting concessions from them. They can, try and influence their behavior, which they've done. They've influenced the Saudis now to, come out with this claim that Khashoggi was killed by rogue elements. And then the third maybe issue that's relating to the recordings is that most likely this was obtained by bugging the Saudi consulate, either by intercepting people's devices or by bugs placed within the consulate. So they'll be very loath to release the actual recordings of the tapes, because that gives away some of their intelligence work. So it's unlikely that we'll hear anything for now, but some excerpts have been released into the Turkish media, and it's likely that if the Saudis do not cooperate with the Turks as the Turks would like, you'll be getting little releases on social media or through government-friendly media in Turkey.
You mentioned something quite interesting there. Why would Turkey want to blackmail Saudi Arabia?
So, I use the word blackmail, but, in terms of, I would say, international geopolitics, it's not so much blackmail, it's more about influence, as in what can one country use as leverage over another country. So, in terms of Saudi Arabia, their leverage over the world is they're very, very rich, and they have they have a huge control of oil. So, by fluctuating their production, they can either increase or decrease the oil prices at will. They can take their money and move it from one market to another, creating fluctuations to the economy. So that's their leverage. So that's not blackmail per se, it's leverage. And the recording, so to answer your question as to why Turkey would want to have leverage over Saudi Arabia, it goes back to the dynamics of the Middle East and near Asia, in that the two largest, most powerful Sunni Arab countries or Sunni countries are Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia gains its legitimacy not just from its wealth, but also from being the custodians of Islam's holy sites. Turkey gains its legitimacy from its history as from the Ottoman Empire, from its very, very powerful and competent military, and also from it being the link between Europe and Asia. Turkey and Saudi Arabia are involved in this kind of clash into who's going to be the leader of the Sunni Muslim world. And it's it's both of them maneuvering around each other for influence. Obviously, the Turks are much better at this game than the Saudis, but the Saudis have a lot of money, and with the coming of President Trump, they've now got a very friendly air in the White House. So this has given the Turks a great, advantage over the Saudis now, because they're now forcing there to be a schism between the Saudis and the U.S. government, in that even though President Trump doesn't want to move against the Saudis, the U.S. Congress, the U.S. media, U.S. society will be putting a lot of pressure on the U.S. government to move against the Saudis and put some kind of sanctions on them.
You've mentioned the United States. How should the international community react to the admission of guilt from Saudi Arabia? Do you see the Saudi Arabia government facing severe sanctions for this crime?
Well, this is again is a very fascinating question, and this is what makes the situation. If we remove obviously the personal tragedy of this man being killed, it's from an analytical point of view, it's a really fascinating problem, because the big problem, and the Saudis have been very clever in what they've done is they've tied the Western countries such as Britain, America, France, and all the other larger countries into their economy, through huge defense purchases and also through their oil sector. So to move against Saudi Arabia, you're moving up against huge chunks of the Western countries' economies, which would suffer. I mean, it's not that the Saudis wouldn't suffer, but the Western countries would suffer from fault lines to their economy. So everybody wants there to be a nice compromise solution. So what will come out, I mean, where the problems will come will be how the Saudis present their compromise solution. Now, by denying everything for 2 weeks and they're now finally coming out and bringing out a few or 18 scapegoats, they're making it very difficult for people to kind of go along with that, because as you can see, there's been an angry reaction in the US Congress. And if they persist with, this kind of narrative of, oh, well, we knew nothing about it, but we kept denying it for 2 weeks, it makes those people who defend them look like fools, for those who maybe, have that sense of conscience. There's also the internal Saudi issue. So MBS, the Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, is part of one faction of the royal family. If the other faction sense that he's been weakened and that the US is not going to give him that support, they'll move against him. So then that will then lead to more and more snowball effect of whether the US will try and temper their reaction to avoid empowering his opponents, or they will move heavily against him to try and balance out his power and tame his exuberance. So it's an interesting dynamic.
What impact is Jamal Khashoggi's death likely to have on press freedom worldwide if the Saudi monarchy is absolved of this crime?
I would say that the impact on press freedom per se is not going to be as profound as one would think, because as unfortunate as it sounds, journalists are being killed at a fairly alarming rate nowadays. In Russia, there's been quite a few high-profile killings of journalists. South America, Africa, just the other day, a few Russian journalists were killed in Central Africa, were murdered essentially in Central Africa. There's been no outrage. This will be different because it's been so high-profile. As I said, it ties into international geopolitics. But for the ordinary journalists, like yourselves, going out on the ground, doing this kind of a job, it's not going to bring any additional protections. For the high-profile ones, it might make a bit of a difference. That you'll most likely find some new act being put in, and some new pronouncements made by the UN. But it doesn't change anything. Anybody who thinks they can get away with killing a journalist will go ahead and try and kill a journalist, because it's not about what the world thinks. It's about impunity. And, if the Saudis didn't think they would get away with this, they wouldn't have tried it.
Chidi Nwonu, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come on the program, Palestine gets the go-ahead to act more like a full member of the UN General Assembly in 2019. Please stay with us.